Hi guys, I'm Mike.
And I'm Ash.
And this is F1 Fanatics. Welcome back to our season review, where we're going to look in detail at the kind of season, have a discussion about the whole season as a whole, and also have a little bit of a look forward to 2020. And it should be a pretty exciting season, I imagine so, with what we've seen in this season. But what we're going to start off with is we ran some polls on Twitter to kind of interact with you guys and to see what your thoughts were on kind of some key questions that we thought from from the season there. So guys, don't forget, if you are new around here, you can subscribe to the channel and you can get more of our kind of Christmas content or kind of winter break content, more like this. But first question, Ash, we're going to start off with is, who was the driver of the first half of the season? So this is kind of from Australia to the summer break. Our contenders in the poll were Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz. There was also another option, in case you thought someone else there. Who was your driver of the first half of the season?
For the first half of the season, I'm going to go with Lewis Hamilton, because just the sheer number of wins he got in the first half of the season, we had the summer break and we were already saying, well, Hamilton's got his 6th title. The consistency, there was, what was it, one race in the first half of the season where he wasn't on the podium. So you can't, he was pushed close, I would say, by Carlos Sainz for the first half in terms of best driver. But for me, Hamilton gets it.
And get this, I disagree. I thought Lewis, absolutely incredible, fantastic, and knock it, just to kind of be a little bit out there. Max Verstappen for me was my drive the first half of the season. He carried on his good form from the previous season. The Red Bull at that stage was for me the 3rd best car on the grid. He had 21 consecutive top 5 finishes, getting that win in Austria and Hockenheim were absolutely superb performances, and pushing Lewis as close as he could at the Hungaroring. I thought was an incredible first half of the season from Max Verstappen. But now we're going to see what you guys thought. So, get the phone out, get the results up. So, drum roll please, Ash. Obviously, Ashley's choice was Lewis Hamilton. My choice was Max Verstappen, and this vote was actually very close. There was only 5% in it, and it was with 36% of the vote, Max Verstappen did win the first half of the season. Lewis was in second with 31, and Carlos Sainz 24% of the vote as well. Moving on to our second question, and that is, who was the driver of the second half of the season? And in the poll, the options were Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez and Daniel Ricciardo. Go on, just had to remember there. Other one you could put obviously into the case, a very good second half of the season, was Pierre Gasly. But for us, those are the 3 options. Ash, who would be your choice of the second half of the season?
And I'm going for that other option. I'm going to go for Pierre Gasly, because he had what you can only call an awful first half of the season. The pressure of taking a step up into the Red Bull that didn't suit his driving style wasn't great for him. But he went back to Toro Rosso, dealt with the disappointment of being dropped, and had a fantastic season and almost managed to get 6th place in the Drivers' Championship. Very close to it, and was unfortunate in the final race not to have that opportunity to go for it.
I think if he hadn't been involved in that collision, I think he would have secured it. For me, was Sergio Perez. The car was slow to develop, and it was, not a great season for Racing Point up until the summer break. But then after the summer break, once they had got that development right, everything fell into place. Sergio Perez before Spa hadn't scored a point since Azerbaijan, but after Spa, he only didn't score a point in one race of the season, which was Singapore, when he had an engine failure which forced him to retire. He had an absolutely fantastic second half of the season, and actually he scored the most points out of any of the midfield drivers in that period of the season, which was hugely impressive for me, and was my driver of the second half of the season. But now for what you guys thought. Phones out again. Let's see, can I click on the right picture this time? Oh, I've done it. There we go. So, the actual vote was for other. But I counted up the vote totals in the comments, and it was kind of split with 1 or 2 votes for other people. I think Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas were mentioned in the comments, and also Pierre Gasly, of course. So I am going to refer to the actual vote itself, and that was Charles Leclerc with his 2 wins at Spa and Monza, and then obviously, you know, having a strong second half, 7 pole positions in the season. Yeah, Charles Leclerc is your guys' vote with 25%. Sergio Perez was second with 20%, and Daniel Ricciardo third with 10%. Then other, probably Pierre Gasly or Bottas was the ones who came within there. But that is our second question. Our third question is, who was the driver for the entirety of the season? And the options go back to those initial 3 that we had in the first half of the season. Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz, or other if you think someone outside of that. Ash, who is your driver of the season?
Carlos Sainz. First half of the season was brilliant. Got off to a rocky start with a few reliability issues, but then got into his own routine, and the amount of times we had races where we were saying, oh, Carlos Sainz. Didn't really see much of him, but was getting really strong finishes. And the second half of the season was much the same. Started off where few retirements because of things that were out of his control, and then got back into the swing of things and did really well throughout, and getting best of the rest in the Drivers' Championship was fantastic.
First one we're going to agree on. I also thought Carlos Sainz was my driver of the season. I just think within that McLaren, getting, like I said, 6th in the Drivers' Championship, that was a really hugely effort, and he was very consistent throughout. You could probably say he had a bit of teething problems in his team at the start in Bahrain and in China. You could maybe say that he was suspect of maybe being a bit overly keen, obviously having been forced to retire in Australia. But from that point on, any retirements he had were out of his control, and yeah, he was just incredibly consistent, and how he pushed that midfield forward was very impressive for Carlos Sainz. But what did you guys think? The overall driver of the season was, someone agrees with us,
Carlos Sainz.
Carlos Sainz. With 39% of the vote, he was your guys' driver of the season. So yeah, it's nice that we all first agree on that, and it's hard to argue really with that winner. Lewis Hamilton coming in second with 32% of the vote, and Max Verstappen was third with 25% of the vote. And now we move on, guys, to what we thought was the race of the season. And there are 3 options, as well as obviously the other as well, if you thought was the case. Brazil, Hockenheim, Silverstone, and then other. So races like Austria, Hungary, Monza could all kind of really fall into that category. But yes, Ash, what was your race of the season?
I'm going to go for the opposite one to that you're going to go for.
Yep.
I'm going to say Hockenheim, just because the fact that you didn't know what was going to happen. You couldn't really take your eyes off of it. You'd go, if you were to, you'd come back and someone would have spun off somewhere, or someone would have gone onto the wrong tyres. There was a lot of uncertainty, which actually created great drama throughout the race. So yeah, and then obviously getting Daniel Kvyat being on the podium, Lance Stroll finishing 4th. It was just a real mix-up within the finish, really. So fantastic race.
Hockenheim was a fantastic race, and up until this race happened, was my favourite race of the season. But my favourite race of the season was Brazil. I loved the battle at the front between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, and the strategy calls that went right for Red Bull, not quite so right for Mercedes. It was a brilliant kind of battle throughout. There were brilliant battles throughout the midfield, and then that safety car happened with Bottas' engine obviously failing, and that load of drama that ensued and caused chaos at the end. The Ferraris clashing together, then causing a second safety car, the bit of suspension damage kind of going into Stroll's car, forcing him to retire. Albon being spun out by Lewis Hamilton, Pierre Gasly being on the podium, and then all the drama of whether the stewards would kind of decide whether Carlos Sainz would get that podium, and McLaren obviously got their first podium since 2014 when Jenson Button and Kevin Magnussen were on the podium. This is just going to be a common theme that I've actually remembered that one now. But yes, that is what my thought was, but what do you guys do? Do you agree with either me or Ash? Was it something different? Well, some honourable mentions I think were to Austria and Monza. I think they were the ones that, when people voted other, they were the ones commenting on what they thought on that front. But the winner was Hockenheim with 48% of the vote, so almost 50%. People loved the rain and they loved the carnage that ensued from there. Brazil was second with 31% of the vote, and Silverstone only getting a measly 13%. But I thought the battle between Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen was probably worth a few more votes from that. I thought that was a brilliant fight from there. But yes, that was what it was in terms of them. We now move on to our next question, and that is, who was Rookie of the Year? And so obviously you've only got 4 contenders for this one, no other option here. That is Lando Norris in the McLaren, Alex Albon in the Toro Rosso and then Red Bull, George Russell in the Williams, and Antonio Giovinazzi in the Alfa Romeo. Ash, who was your Rookie of the season?
This one's going to be short and sweet, isn't it? I think we both agree.
I think it is.
Lando Norris definitely was Rookie of the season. Albon pushed him close, but I would say Albon was higher in the Drivers' Championship down to the fact he had half a season in the Red Bull. But Lando started off qualifying fantastically, managed to out-qualify Carlos Sainz, who we've both said was driver of the season. In terms of race performances, did really well, making sure to actually improve his consistency on a Sunday after the summer break, which is something we were both looking for. So overall, I don't think you can actually argue that another rookie was really ahead of him overall.
Unless you're the FIA, of course, who gave the official award to Alex Albon.
Yeah.
Alex did well in his rookie season, but in fairness, I would honestly rate George Russell's season ahead of Alex Albon's. That might have been, like we said in our season ratings video, if you take away the team and the name, the stats that George Russell did this season, and when teams were fighting him at the back and he was given an opportunity, it was really impressive what he did. Alex Albon, I think, has had a very solid first half, but for me, Lando Norris, he is that winner for me. And I think also building on what Ash said, it was the way that he battled with top drivers from top teams on track. So when at the start of the race that McLaren obviously had qualified well, and then with good starts somehow sometimes mixed itself in amongst other opponents. I remember fighting Lewis throughout the season. Charles Leclerc, he did some kind of great defending at before obviously conceding a place in Brazil. Vettel and Verstappen at times. He did some absolutely fantastic wheel-to-wheel racing that showed that given the car to compete at the top, he's a really exciting talent that I think everyone's watching out for.
Definitely.
But let's hear from you guys. And unsurprisingly, this one was Lando Norris. The biggest winning margin so far, 77% of the vote. And I think he certainly is the fans' driver of the season, if not the FIA's. Alex Albon was second with only 13% of the vote, but George Russell did get 10% of the vote as well. So it was very close between those two. Poor Antonio, 0%. It was a solid season for Gio, but yeah, he was, in fairness, the weakest out of the rookies comparing across their whole season, although he did obviously progress in the second half of the season. But that's that one. We now move on to most improved driver of the season. So the candidates for this one, I'll get this one up because I'll check on there. So the candidates for this one were Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc and Valtteri Bottas, or other, if you thought another driver was most improved. So Ash, who was your most improved driver of the season?
I'm going with Carlos Sainz. When you look at how he matured across the summer break leading into the year, and then also getting those knockbacks initially in the McLaren, performed fantastically across the season. I would say if you look at the likes of Leclerc and Bottas, they had the opportunities at the front because the cars they were in, unfortunately, that is the situation we're in where we have that Formula 1, 1.5 and so on. And the one that actually was able to, I would say, outdrive the car the most was Carlos Sainz. And that goes for everyone on the grid. So definitely, really good season for him. And yeah, you can tell that, big fan.
I agree. I think pre-season, or in previous seasons, only Martin Brundle had probably talked up the talent of Carlos Sainz and how he quite rated Carlos and thought he was, you know, an exciting prospect. I think when he signed that 2-year deal for McLaren, I think everyone thought it was a solid pick, and he'd shown promise at Renault in his previous season and a bit. But, you know, I don't think anyone could have honestly said, hand on heart, that, you know, unless you're his family, obviously, that Carlos Sainz would perform how he did and getting best of the rest. And there are some very talented and very impressive midfield drivers in that region as well. To get best of the rest, yes, the McLaren proved to be the best car out of the best of the rest, but still the way that he drove it was a big part of that in terms of it being best of the rest. And it turns out you guys agree with us. So that is 70% of the vote goes to Carlos Sainz. Again, another massive winning margin there. God, the McLaren boys are popular, aren't they?
They are.
No doubt due to their kind of popularity on social media, I think, in how they've been. Charles Leclerc and Valtteri Bottas then shared the vote with 15% of the remaining vote, and there was no other. So people did agree that those were the three who, you could argue, obviously Valtteri 2.0 was mentioned, and I don't think anyone saw Charles Leclerc's step up as quickly as what it would come at Ferrari. But Carlos Sainz again stole the show. Moving on from most improved driver, we now move on to most improved team. And yeah, we've gone through. The options were McLaren, Toro Rosso, and I was unsure on this one, so I put Ferrari because they kind of improved throughout the year, but overall there wasn't really much of an argument, and you can tell that that wasn't my vote. And then other, if you guys thought it was. So Ash, who was your most improved team of the season?
I'm split on this one. Now, if you look at the season as a whole, you have to turn around and say that McLaren were the most improved, considering where they came from last year. But I'm actually going to go a little bit off the wall here, and I'm going to go for Racing Point. When you think of where they were middle of last season and the uncertainty around the team going forward because of the financial issues they were having, to come back this year and end up getting to the stage where you had Sergio Perez finishing a few races as best of the rest, you had Lance Stroll getting up into the points for races, and obviously the 4th place thanks to the weather, but the team itself looked ready to compete in that midfield again when we got to Abu Dhabi. So I'm going to go for them because of their progression through the season. If I was to look at the most improved team just from comparing last season to this, it would be the McLaren. But I'm going to go with Racing Point on it.
I'm going to go with McLaren. And McLaren, just how they came, obviously towards the end of last season, they were at the back end of the grid with where Williams had dropped off with Alonso and Stoffel van Dorn. And yeah, they sacrificed a lot of last year for the car this year, and it really has paid off dividends. They've made a huge leap forward in terms of where they had finished last year. In the constructors, was it 6th or was it even lower at 9th? I'm not sure off the top of my head. But they certainly were below the Renaults and the Haas. But in terms of where they've leapt ahead of Renault, it's been mightily impressive. And you guys agree with me with 91% of the vote. So absolutely bullets in this one. I don't know if McLaren fans hijacked this vote. But yeah, crazy on that front. Toro Rosso did get 9%. Unfortunately, no one agrees with you on Racing Point.
That's fine.
And Ferrari, obviously, 0%. I was struggling to get... Well, I just put a team there for now. Probably would have been better off going with 2. But there it is.
Probably
on
would have
that
been better
front.
off going with Racing Point.
Oh, it could,
Might have
clearly
got
would have. It might
People
have got
would
a
have thought
vote.
about it then.
They would have gone, oh yeah, Racing Point. But now we move on to most notable incident from the season, and there was a
few.
There was a few. I think I will read you out. I will go. I'll only include one Vettel incident, although there's been a few. But if you want to comment one that isn't the one I chose, then people could do that. But yes, that one incident I chose, which I imagine people, it might have been debatable, but Vettel at Monza was the one where obviously unsafe coming back onto the track, causing the Stroll thing and Ghazi, the knock-on kind of dominoes effect on that incident. Obviously, honourable mentions to Silverstone, where he just went up the back of Verstappen. Canada, going off the track, penalised 2-1 on the end of the race in terms of moving it. And obviously the Brazil incident as well, you can probably throw into it, but least
Bahrain.
Notable. Bahrain, the spin, Hamilton. Oh my God, there's Vettel could have just had this pole by himself, unfortunately. It's been one of those seasons where the Ferrari car and him just haven't gelled well. But yes, Vettel at Monza, that was one. Other option, Leclerc and Lewis at Monza. And Max and Kimi at Spa. And then there was other involved in there. But Ash, what was your kind of most notable incident of the season?
This is a hard one. But I think because of the way that it ended up going for the season, I am actually going to go with Vettel and Verstappen at Silverstone. Because at that stage, it looked as if Ferrari were down and out and not really having that opportunity to compete for wins consistently. Red Bull were on a surge, and yeah, it was the fact that Vettel just completely missed his braking point, and I think I said it in our review, it was more the fact he sort of wasn't expecting to pick up as much of a toe off of Verstappen and then just completely lost it. And then also you had the fact that Verstappen's car was thrown up in the air. How he finished the race with no suspension damage, I don't know. And how Vettel managed to finish the race as well, considering how hard hit it was. It was...
You consider how light a touch that Leclerc and Vettel had in Brazil, and the carnage damage it did to both of their cars.
Exactly.
Yeah, the one at kind of Silverstone, you go, How does this happen?
So yeah, and it was just because the timing of the season as well. It's one of those where you think, yeah, actually, that was quite a big turning point, because it then Verstappen then dropped off up pretty much for the rest of the season, didn't he?
He did go on and win Hockenheim.
He did, but like,
and then second in Hungary.
No, but when you look at the season after that.
Yeah, after that.
That, Red Bull started to dip as Ferrari then improving, and it was like, yeah, it was almost like a crossover phase at that point.
I can see that in terms of it. For me, it was the Vettel at Monza one, because at this stage, people had basically written off Sebastian Vettel. They'd seen enough. Vettel was done. He was finished. He was over with. Ridiculous thing. He was only one penalty point away, or one incident away from facing a race ban. And yeah, obviously people were seriously questioning the capabilities of Sebastian Vettel. He then went on to go and win Singapore, and was driving very well in Sochi before his retirement, and he actually had a pretty strong rest of the season, I would say, from Monza onwards. So it was most notable because it was a pretty bad one, I would say, in terms of danger on there, but it was also one that when he was at his lowest, Vettel came back and rose up again and proved he's still got something left in his tank to fight going into 2020. But your guys, well, you agree with me. It was Vettel at Monza. I'm not sure if your reasons are generally agree. You might just be on that it was dangerous and most notable one in memory. But that was 35% of the vote. Second was other, but it was kind of spread across. There was the Austria incident in terms of Leclerc and Verstappen, in terms of what it meant in how Leclerc would then race for the rest of the season. So it was notable on that front. There was a nod, obviously, to the Canada incident and Bahrain, so they were kind of sketched across a little bit of Vettel ones. So the outright second one was Leclerc and Lewis at Monza. Obviously, the black and white flag was a little bit controversial at the time. And yeah, but it allowed...
It was the last time it was used as well, wasn't it?
It was the last time it was used.
Yeah, so...
That we were going to see it more often, and then we didn't. So stewarding all round was probably a little bit confusing. But yes, and then Max and Kimi at Spa only got 6% of the vote, but I'm not really too surprised at that, but I was trying to throw in some different drivers. For the incidents, we now move on to, and the last question from you guys is favourite inter-team rivalry across the season. And obviously we had some interesting ones that were in prospect at the start. Obviously the contenders for this one are Vettel versus Leclerc, Hamilton versus Bottas, Sainz versus Norris, and probably at the start of the season Daniel Ricciardo and Hulkenberg were probably in contention there. But other was given an option if you wanted to do with that, as that Ricciardo Hulkenberg didn't really live up to any sort of expectation. But Ash, what was your favourite inter-team rivalry across the season?
George Russell and Robert Kubica.
God, left field.
No, that wasn't really a battle in the end, was it? More a slaughter. I would go for Vettel and Leclerc, mainly because it has set up a very interesting 2020 now. So this season we had Vettel being told, you're number one, and that's how we started the season. It was, we'll give Vettel preference in situations like that, where, in all honesty, at the start of the season, Leclerc was the faster driver, and there was no reason why Vettel should have been given those opportunities, especially as there was scatterings of mistakes coming into his drives. Then, obviously, they got to the incident in Monza, where Vettel then wasn't impressed with the fact that Leclerc hadn't given him the toe in qualifying. You then got Singapore, where a dodgy strategy call. Wasn't really a dodgy strategy call, but
Vettel was just quicker.
That's how it came out. Dodgy strategy call got Vettel ahead of Leclerc. He would have got ahead of him anyway, probably, but you know. Then you had Russia, where they just constructed the idea that let's try and get a 1-2, when, in all honesty, because of the power that they had and, you know, being able to get the toe, it was always going to happen. They didn't need to do any form of constructing. And then Vettel refusing. He was the faster driver. There was no need for him to pull over and let Leclerc pass. And then you ended up with Brazil. It's just set up a really interesting season next year, because neither of those drivers are going to accept being the number 2 in the team. And Matteo Binotto is going to have to get control of that quite quickly, because otherwise, I've said it before, it will end up being a Lewis and a Nico Rosberg situation. And the problem Ferrari have at this moment in time is their car in race trim is not fast enough for them to be having those battles and having their drivers taking points off of each other and risking actually having them coming together. So to see how they actually progress next season and how the team dynamic is changed will be very interesting.
And for me also, it was Vettel versus Leclerc. Much of the same reasons that Ashley kind of put there, but for me it was the exciting, there was a lot of hype around Leclerc. Was he this young talent? They've dropped Kimi Raikkonen. Is it too soon? Is it the right time? And he's really stepped up and really pushed Vettel. And I think he's pushed Vettel to better performances than we might have seen from him as well, in a car that he wasn't happy with. And Vettel as well has probably brought out the best in a young driver trying to aspire and make his mark on the sport, in terms of by beating him in some races and going, I need to be better, I strive to be better. So it's been a real thing that's driven them forward. What's let them down is how Ferrari have managed them and managed situations that I think, well, just in the way that they interact with each other, the way they talk to each other, Charles Leclerc and Sebastian Vettel for me seem to get on quite well at the moment. It obviously could go downhill quite quickly. But Ferrari they're lucky there that they get on well off track. They've got to manage things better on track so that it at least comes across fair that, 90% of the time they can turn around and go, if one of the drivers has a complaint, and like going, well, we would have done the same for you in that situation, and he goes, your performance wasn't good enough today. It needs to be performance related rather than any sort of weird strategy calls that are just going to cause confusion within the team. But your thoughts on the final kind of question out there was Vettel versus Leclerc. 71% of the vote, another dominating one to finish there, and I think it was the most exciting one of the season. None of Hamilton versus Bottas. I think obviously Hamilton did convincingly beat Bottas in the end, but it was still interesting for stages. Well, maybe slightly harsh on Bottas there. And then Sainz and Norris, I think, due to the popularity of the pair, it was an interesting rivalry. Other was Daniel Ricciardo and Nico Hülkenberg, but yeah, like I said at the start, it was really a rivalry. Two really exciting talents, drivers in their kind of 30s looking to push on and kind of take control of the team. It never really turned into a battle, more just Daniel Ricciardo slowly took more and more control of the team as the season went on. But guys, that is the questions section done. Hope you enjoyed that. We enjoyed obviously doing those polls and interacting with you guys. Interesting to hear your thoughts and how they compared to our thoughts. So that was interesting there. Now we're going to go on to a section where we just kind of give our general thoughts of the 2019 season as a whole, the kind of things that interested us within it, some kind of controversy within there that we're like, God, can't believe that happened, and just there. So Ash, what your general thoughts of the season?
Well, the one thing that's going to be the takeaway from this season was the utter dominance of Lewis Hamilton. The fact that he walked away with it in the end, and it didn't really seem that he had a clear challenger, and that was the issue. In past seasons, there's been one driver that has pushed him all the way, and be it Nico Rosberg, Sebastian Vettel, or Felipe Massa in 2008. But this year, he just seemed to have that edge over everyone. It was like, even when he had not necessarily underperformed, but hadn't performed at his best, he was still getting more points than the drivers that were challenging him. So obviously we had Hockenheim, where Bottas really should have been getting second in that race, but ended up crashing, and Hamilton went away from Hockenheim with 1 point, but extended his lead in the championship. And then,
funnily enough, if Bottas had finished second in that race, then even with penalties, Hamilton wouldn't have made the top 10 all points.
So it would have been a big swing, which at that stage of the season, can we say it would have changed the outcome? Probably not, but it would have been a real mental boost for Valtteri Bottas going forward. And then the second half of the season, Hamilton sort of continued where he left off, whereas other drivers sort of just fell away. Like Bottas fell away in the second half of the season, Verstappen did, Leclerc and Vettel both took gains going forward, but then that only really lasted for, I'd say 4, maybe 5 races.
4 races, because then back in Mexico,
you then had Red Bull being back there. Brazil, Red Bull were the ones that were competing.
USA, Red Bull were the ones competing.
Yeah, so you had like a mini Ferrari resurgence, which faded quicker than it started. Red Bull did a typical Red Bull, where they didn't start the season well, picked up in the middle, but then dropped off at the end, then only to pick up again. And yeah, it never really looked in doubt, did it?
No, and for me, what line could describe it perfectly is consistency is key. The reason why Mercedes were able to dominate this year is throughout 21 race weekends, they were able to consistently perform at the top half. Ferrari had it within them. They had a car that was capable of challenging. Obviously, they could have probably still won Bahrain with Sebastian Vettel if he not made that mistake. And there were other notable incidents throughout that we spoke about it when we did their kind of season ratings, that, they got a lot of things wrong, and it could have been a lot closer. And if they were closer, then that puts pressure. And Mercedes weren't perfect. They did make mistakes, especially when pressure was on. Hockenheim, the pressure was on, and there were mistakes that kind of ensued in that race. And yeah, Ferrari never applied any pressure, so when there's no pressure, it kind of fell into comfortable, we're winners, that's what we do.
Talking of consistency though, correct me if I'm wrong, but there were only 3 races this season where there wasn't a Mercedes driver on the podium, wasn't
I'm
there?
convinced, yeah.
So there was Hockenheim.
And the majority of those were Hamilton.
Yeah, because he got 17 podiums this season. But you had Hockenheim, you had Singapore, because that was the 2 Ferraris and
Correct, yep.
Verstappen, and then you had Brazil, which Hamilton would have been on the podium if he had waited
3 more
corners.
If you listen to Alex Albon.
Yeah, so it is one of those where you've got a driver who had 17 podiums, but a team that had 18 race podiums. They had more than that because there were obviously the string of 1-2s and things like that. But you know where I'm coming from with that point. That's incredible.
Yeah. And for me, Red Bull were always going to have a transition season. Now, for me, we spoke about it, maybe controversially, in our F1 Worldwide episode with Mark. Make sure you go and kind of check that out. That's the start of the fan podcast. So if you guys want to be involved, get your say as fans, come on to a podcast chatting with me and Ash. Let us know in the comments below and we will get in contact with you and organise something there. But Red Bull, it was always going to be a transition year because Honda had done so poorly at McLaren. It was going to be interesting how they did. With 3 race wins across the season, still pretty impressive. There could have been maybe more at stages. There was the potential maybe for 5 if some circumstances had kind of fallen into place. But they've made steps forward. But 2020 still, I see them as a transition year, making steps forward. They're still the 4th best engine in terms of out-and-out power on the grid, which is where they're losing out to the Ferraris and the Mercedes. And even though they had an aero package to match the Mercedes in Abu Dhabi at the end, they only really seem to excel when altitude lessened the performance of the Mercedes engine.
Well, this year I would probably say the only area where you could say that the Red Bull was ahead was probably the aero package. Because in terms of chassis, I would say the Merc and the McLaren, I think I've said that before when we've been talking about things. Yeah. The Merc and the McLaren chassis was incredible. Engine-wise, I'd say the Mercedes probably edged it across the whole season. But when you look at the gains Ferrari made in terms of engine power for the second half of the season, it really did leave them on a real back foot. So
I would say the Ferrari engine is the best engine on the grid, but the Mercedes whole package together is what makes them better because, and
but
also
the Mercedes engine is ahead of the Honda.
But also, it's ahead of the Renault and the Honda. Yeah. But you also have to criticise, and this is probably the one big criticism of Mercedes in terms of they had a reliability upgrade after the summer break, and across them and their customer teams had the most reliability problems in the second half of the season. So that was the only little worrying thing and tarnish on a pretty spectacular season for Mercedes. But there, I think we've kind of probably covered the top teams. Formula 1.5 for me was fascinating to watch this year. The re-emergence from McLaren as a team back on the rise, the stagnation of Renault and frustration within there, and obviously the drama around Hülkenberg and Ocon. Yeah.
The free fall of Haas, the deterioration of Williams' position that was already in a bad place, and then you had the Alfa and the Toro Rosso, which were sort of in between, because both cars, I would say, were hit and miss. You had some really good performances. So Alfa, you obviously had Brazil, where it got 4th and 5th. You had the Toro Rosso, which you can list a lot of races this season where they did well, but
standout ones have to be the podiums.
Well, you've got, I would say that up there with the podiums would also be Alex Albon in China, going from pit lane to points. But you then look at it and think, they had races where they were struggling to get past the Haas, and there were times where they were actually in a race with the Williams. Like, it's... Admittedly, some of those were down to
damage
occurring, which put them on a back foot. But it's like Gasly in Abu Dhabi struggled to catch back up and then get past both Williams. It took him a while to actually make that step up. Where, really, when you think of performance-wise, that Toro Rosso should have been streaking away from the Williams.
Should have been. In fairness to Gasly on that one, he was in the pits a really long time, and it was the start of the race, so therefore they got a lap and a 2. And even with a superior car to the Williams, it isn't that bad that you can just catch up 2 laps like that.
But it's a Williams car that was regularly 2, almost 3 laps down.
Yeah, cool. But in that race, Russell was only lapped once and Kubica was only lapped twice. So therefore, and with how superior Hamilton won that race, it wasn't necessarily probably the easiest. But I take your point. It was a bit of an inconsistent one with Toro Rosso. For me, probably, along with McLaren, one that's really exciting to watch out for, and funnily enough, I forgot to mention it in the F1 Weekly News Show, so I think it's probably a good point to talk about it. Racing Point, once they had the backing of Lawrence Stroll and everything was in place, with those points finishes with Sergio Perez scoring the most points out of the McLarens and Renaults in the second half of the season, with the rumour of obviously Lawrence Stroll buying Aston Martin and branding it as Aston Martin Racing Point or whatever, or
drop the Racing Point.
Exactly.
Aston Martin is a classic racing name, and if it is Aston Martin, just imagine we could see Racing Green back on the grid.
It would be Racing Green back on the grid. That is the kind of rumoured livery.
The only way we're going to get that is if we get Aston Martin, Jaguar or Lotus back on the grid. So we need one of them.
We do. And Racing Point with Aston Martin looks the most likely. So for me, Racing Point, obviously the video we did with Raz in terms of can they challenge in the future, Racing Point are a really exciting team for me, and they're an exciting team because they're an independent. Obviously, if they got Aston Martin, would they become a manufacturer works team, and Aston Martin have a development centre at Silverstone next to the Racing Point factory. So
let's be honest, if Aston Martin do come in, they're not going to be a customer engine. Aston Martin will want to put their own engines into that.
But it's actually
maybe not initially.
It works quite well, I think, because obviously Red Bull restricted to Honda and demands there. Racing Point are unlikely to maintain, but they're unlikely to maintain that because obviously you can't provide more than 3 engines. And obviously McLaren wrapped up in 2021. Williams are wrapped up, and obviously the works team, and the teams aren't going to vote to allow Mercedes to have a 4th engine. So it seems likely that Racing Point would have to go Renault, because Honda were reluctant to provide for 2 teams anyway. So Red Bull and Toro Rosso is probably their max. They make it difficult on themselves, Honda. But yeah,
another team gives you more opportunity to get data, and but
crazy.
But yeah, no,
Renault there, and I would think if Aston Martin did come in, it would be with the idea of maybe providing an engine, and that would be exciting actually to see a different power unit and see how it compares.
Well, if you think about it, up until middle of last season when the change to the Honda engine was actually confirmed, there were still the rumours going around that Aston Martin were going to come in as an engine supplier for Red Bull. So you had the Aston Martin branded Red Bull, even though they didn't really have a lot to do with the F1 team. So the rumours have been there for a little while that they were wanting to come into F1 anyway. And as I say, it would be nice to see Racing Green back on the grid.
It would be, and I think they would be a perfect match. So that's an exciting kind of first of the kind of look forwards from 2019 into 2020 and subsequent seasons. But yeah, that probably covers the grid. The less probably spoken about. Alfa Romeo are probably exciting as well, but you always feel with that restriction with having 1 seat to a Ferrari Junior and not in their control, and having Ferrari backing in Ferrari engines, you always kind of feel that unless Alpha come in with their own engine.
No, it's a junior team. It's not really going to
Exactly.
change, is it?
It's not as much as a Toro Rosso, but it's more so than a Williams to Mercedes.
Or a Racing Point to Mercedes. Yeah.
Or a Racing Point to Mercedes. Yeah. So that is our general thoughts. So we now look ahead to the 2020 season. And I think this kind of encouraged, really, this season. Looking forward to 2020. The rules are the same. Teams have loads of data to kind of get their heads around and kind of progress forward. We're unsure yet whether Pirelli, we're going to have the 2020 Pirelli tyres or we're going to have the 2019 ones still, because Grosjean wasn't particularly optimistic after testing and everyone else has said silent, so that's
at
definite.
This moment in time, I think we will end up with the 2019 ones. I don't see a change, especially as we're then having with 2021. There is going to be a big change. So I think it's one of those where there's no point having a small change into a big change when there's not a this is an improvement. It's one where it's still uncertainty. So just keep everything consistent. And I think that would encourage closer racing, because over the period of a consistent set of rules, everything does close up. So,
yeah, and I think the really interesting ones are going to be, can Ferrari get it together and be a consistent challenger? Because I don't think Red Bull have the engine to compete next year. They have the driver. They have everything around the team. They're building in the right place, but I think it's a year too soon. And it just, will be a difficult one. Ferrari have the engine. They have the capability of building the car. Whether they will or not is another thing. And they have the drivers to maintain a relationship. And I've said it before, and this is the perfect scenario for me for Ferrari. I think this would be the best way to manage the drivers. You go, Sebastian Vettel, you are number one for one last season in your 2020 season with Ferrari. We'll tell you this now at the start of the season, so you have the whole year to go and negotiate with either a Red Bull or a Mercedes, or if they don't take you there, you have kind of options to decide there. But Ferrari will be your last choice there. Leclerc, you fall in line and you will know the decisions favour Sebastian Vettel this season. But after that, we invest our future in you and we will get in a solid number 2 driver. But you will be number 1 and the future of Ferrari with the Tifosi. That would be the ideal way to manage it for me. But I don't know. I don't think that will happen.
No, I don't think it will. But the interesting thing we've got for next season is you've got Red Bull, who have the driver who will, let's be honest, championship next season is most likely to go to Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen, because the battles that Ferrari have been having, and there's no clear management there as to what's going to happen. But you haven't got Red Bull going to be pushing in the constructors. The team that are going to push in the constructors will be Ferrari, because they've got the 2 drivers that are going to be getting consistently within the points at this moment in time. But we don't know. Albon might take a real step up. But for me, I think next season it is going to be that battle between Lewis and Max. It's going to be a lot closer, I feel. And unfortunately, I don't think Red Bull are in a position where they're going to be able to compete over 22 races. And that's the issue. And that's why I think next season we will end up seeing Hamilton match it. We've both said it that we think he will match but not go any further for Schumacher's record. It'd be nice to see him go further, but you know, when you've got...
But when you've got 7, and if he gets 7...
you can't be too selfish.
Nothing for me is off the cards. I would say match is the most likely, but if he got 8, I don't think either of us would be massively surprised on that front with Lewis. I think... I think for me...
different topics.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think for me the real exciting thing about 2020 will be that midfield, and hopefully we get a bit more coverage, because there are some really exciting things. McLaren again, their team dynamic will going to be interesting now. With a season under his belt, Lando Norris, how does he then push? He's already beat Carlos in qualifying. His race performances were improving. That's going to be a really interesting inter-team battle. Renault, Ocon versus Ricciardo. Ricciardo with a season under his belt with Renault. Ocon with a season out, but obviously highly rated and a lot to prove. How is that inter-team battle going to work out? Racing Point, how are they going to push forward as a team? They obviously had a very good second half of the season. Will Lance Stroll step up? He showed signs of improving his qualifying in the second half of the season. Do they have a solid team moving forward and maybe a contender for best of the rest? And then Toro Rosso, for me, I feel will drop off. But drivers Gasly, Kvyat, they're going to be looking for seats outside of the Red Bull programme. And then Alpha, I imagine, will probably be a bit up and down. Haas, flip of a coin. You'll see our thoughts on that, I think, coming out on Thursday with Katie on the video there. And and Williams, lastly. Latifi, be interesting to see how he steps up to F1. And George Russell, can he keep kind of beating his teammate? And will the Williams actually be competitive at all next year?
Yeah, so for me, I think now we're in a position where McLaren are going to have to start looking at themselves as one of the top teams. They've taken that gap to the Renault in terms of performance is a lot bigger than it looks. I think it's one of those where Lando Norris settling in his first season and Ricciardo being that experienced driver that has been able to perform in a car that hasn't realistically been that close to the McLaren in terms of overall performance. So McLaren next season, I think we're going to see a lot more of them trying, say, the alternative strategy, so trying the mediums in qualifying. They tried it a few times this season and got close, so with a little bit of a step up they might be able to manage it, in which case that actually sets them up really nicely for the race, and will be able to give them an opportunity to actually compete more with the guys at the front. Renault, I think they're going to miss the experience of Hülkenberg next season, especially as it's a development year. Because of the 2021 rule change, it's a big development race happening there. So I think they may end up missing out on that experience of Hülkenberg, who has developed cars with them already and has had 10 years of experience. It'd be nice to see George Russell get into Q2 or get a point, you know. Could he continue this whitewashing of his teammate in qualifying? I think it's possible. I think Latifi will end up being closer to him than Kubica was this season. But in terms of one lap pace, I think Russell is going to edge that battle across the season. And yeah, it's one that is setting up really nicely for the one thing we have to mention, silly season, is going to be the whole season, really.
It's going to be mental because I think you mentioned it in a previous video of, is there only 2 or 3 drivers under contract beyond 2021?
Well, 5 of what you would say would be the top 6 are out of contract. So Hamilton, Leclerc, Vettel, Bottas and Verstappen, all of their contracts come to an end at the end of next season.
Is Albon's?
Albon, as far as I was aware, has a longer term contract within the programme.
Okay.
I don't know whether it's a confirmed Red Bull. I think it's within the programme. You've got Pierre Gasly and Daniel Kvyat, who are both going to be pushing to take that seat from Albon, if possible, or get the step up if Verstappen moves on. You've got Ricciardo, who wasn't his contract to 2021.
Yep, Ricciardo's contract's up.
You've got George Russell, who was on a 3-year contract, but his stock is just on the rise. So if a team was to come in and say to Williams, we'll offer to pay you out his contract, the position they're in, they're likely to take it. K-Mags is out. Grosjean's
is out. Sainz is out. He's voicing all the things that he wants to stay, but it's also a bit of...
But Lando's was only a year extension, wasn't it? So Lando's out of contract as well. So really, the only ones where you can say for definite they're likely to be staying within the environment they're at are
Checo.
Well, Checo, you know that. But I was going to say Albon, Kvyat and Gasly, because I'd say that they're going to be...
I don't know. I think Kvyat and Gasly, this is their last season in the Red Bull program. I think
at
least one of them will go.
I think one of them will get the step up for 2021, because Verstappen, I don't see Verstappen staying at Red Bull.
If Verstappen leaves, they go Gasly. I think he's probably the most capable out of the three.
So it's one of those where Checo is probably the only one you can say for definite will be at Racing Point for 2021. Lance Stroll probably will be.
And if Kimi Raikkonen doesn't want to retire, you can say he'll definitely be at Alfa.
Yeah. So, although, would another team, with it being such a big change in the rules, would another team look at him and think, actually, it's worth the expense of having a top driver?
Do you reckon he returns
back
his
to
recycle? No, not Ferrari, because he's already gone back to Ferrari.
Could go again.
There's
back
only
to McLaren.
No, yeah, exactly. That is the only team that he hasn't returned to in his career. So
it is one of those.
2021, Kimi Raikkonen at McLaren. Watch this space.
So yeah, in all honesty, the two you can say probably will stay are Stroll and Checo, and then the three in and around those seats. But other than that, free for all.
Exactly, and
so it's going to be. I reckon silly season will be from Australia right through to Abu Dhabi. I don't think anything's going to be confirmed until it's 100%, because
I think playing with contracts and just how performances as well.
Yeah, drivers are going to want to be getting into the team that is going to be the Mercedes of the 2021 rule change, but. So the drivers are going to want to hold off until they can have some idea, but teams are going to want to hold off, because if a Hamilton, Verstappen, Vettel is available, it doesn't matter which team you are.
You're going to want to try and get them.
You're going to want to try and get them. Are we going to see Hamilton driving a Williams in 2021? Probably not, but
make it happen.
You want to hold out for the best driver you can get.
In fairness, you don't know what Frank Williams and Lewis Hamilton had in that conversation on their hot lap. Claire Williams did say that you've got a lap to convince him to join Williams, so no. Realistically, no. But
realistically, Hamilton probably could get that Williams in the points.
I think what we're saying is there's on track and off track, there's a lot to look forward to 2020, which makes this winter break even longer from there until we have lights out in Melbourne. But it's been obviously it will be our first full season on the channel, but 2019 itself has been a fantastic. Well, we started this since Silverstone, but we've been watching it throughout anyway. We've loved the season. I think you gave it an 8 in the season ratings, and I gave it a 7. There's been some absolutely brilliant races within this season that, as fans, just absolutely enthralling to watch. And the emergence and continuation of the next generation knocking on the door of the old generation, of the Vettels and Hamiltons, with the Verstappens, Leclercs, the Lando Norrises coming in rookies, the George Russell being like, is he Alonso-esque in Minardi in terms of good performances at a backfield team, but then given the right car, would he then lead the top of the field? You don't know in these sort of things, but there's lots of excitement, I think, building for 2020, and that hopefully we're going to have a brilliant season before we have no idea what will happen in 2021. It may just be Mercedes dominating again, or it could go completely left field and have someone like a Brawn GP-esque, so in this case would probably be a Williams rising back up to the top and challenging for the title. You really don't know in these situations, and it is kind of, I think, really exciting. We're both really excited over go. But yeah, that has been the 2019 season, guys. if you are new around here, what can you do, Ash?
You can press the subscribe button so our videos are going into your YouTube inbox, and if you press the bell icon you'll get a notification when one goes live, especially as we're now in that winter break where we're the ones that are going to be providing your F1 content.
Yeah, and if you've liked this one, this is pretty much our wrap and our knock on the head of the 2019 season, bar maybe a couple of special Christmas specials. But this is our last kind of overlook. So if you've liked it, give us a thumbs up and comment down below what were kind of your answers to the questions if you didn't take part in the polls. What was your thoughts on 2019 as a whole? What's intrigued you? What's your kind of talking points that you want? We love getting involved in the comments with you guys. And also, what are you most looking forward to in the 2020 season after this long winter break that we're here to help you through and get through? But for now, UF1 fans, keep racing.